Welcome to Disciple Dojo. In this episode, we have one of our dojo favorites. Those of you that saw our previous episode where Dr. Joey Dodson came on and we talked about Romans 7 and how woefully misunderstood that chapter, that passage is in Paul. Joey is a Pauline scholar, a scholar of the greco-roman world. That's sort of his passion is the Greco-Roman and also first century Jewish background, particularly of Paul. And he's got a new book coming out called Paul the Rabbi, Philosopher. It's coming out, I believe, in February. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description. He sent me a digital copy a couple of weeks ago, and I read it. I think I read it the week before SBL, or I finished it before SBL. It was great. And I learned so much in that book that I did not know. We talk about wisdom of Solomon. We talk about the writings of Seneca. We talk about the echoes of the gospel, or as Tolkien, Lewis, and even Paul himself would say it, the seeds of the gospel that are planted throughout the world in the different cultures, and how it culminates in Jesus for Paul and his audience. So it was a really good discussion. I love talking to Joey. Joey is, in addition to being a legit, phenomenal New Testament scholar, he is also an active youth minister. He ministers primarily to young people, and you can tell because no guest drops pop culture references here in the dojo like Joey Dodson, and that's one of the things we love about him, and talking to him is always an absolute pleasure. So sit back, take a listen. If you appreciate long-form discussions like this, if you appreciate getting introduced to really meaty, in-depth biblical studies resources, if you appreciate any of what we do here at Disciple Dojo, the best way you can show that appreciation is by subscribing to the channel. And when you subscribe, tap the notifications bell. That just tells YouTube, hey, I like this channel enough to want to see more stuff from it, which in turn makes YouTube go, maybe there are other people out there that might want to see this. And that's how we grow. We're so thankful for all of you that have subscribed. As of this recording, we just passed 66,000 subscribers, which is just bananas. We're going to have a big celebration when we reach 100,000. So you can help us get there by subscribing, sharing dojo videos, letting your friends, family, other Bible nerds know about what we're doing. But yeah, enough for me. Let's talk with our friend, Dr. Joey Dodson. All right.
Thanks for having me on, by the way.
Absolutely, man. You were a blast. We had so much fun with the Romans episode, was just so great. And the comments and everybody, dojo viewers, they're like, we got to have Joey back on. He's great. Love this guy. So you got fans here on the channel, and I'm already rolling. So folks, if you're watching this, we're here with Joey Dodson, who is back, and he's got a couple of books in the next couple of years coming out, and the one that's most closest on the horizon, coming out a couple of months from now, is Paul the Rabbi, Philosopher. And it is published by our friends at Hendrickson, and they were kind enough to send me a digital copy to read. I read it 2 weeks ago, and it was great. So I said, Joey, let's have you on to talk about it. So let's start. Before we jump in and talk about the book, I want to say there's the dedication to it. Had a great Lord of the Rings reference. You dedicated the book to Preston. I'm assuming Preston Sprinkle, a very good friend of yours, and said to Preston for reminding me that there is some good in this world and it's still worth fighting for. Give me, for viewers that may not know that you are connected with Preston, tell us just a little bit about like how you guys connected, how your friendship formed. How is he the Sam to your Frodo, or you the Frodo to his? Who's who in that scenario?
I don't know. Back when they came out with Lord of the Rings in the movies, Peter Jackson's, I was living in Houston, and we would dress up for the midnight showing. It was quite the great party, and I wanted to dress up like Strider, Aragorn. But because I'm so short, everyone just assumed that I was a hobbit. The philosophers talk about how true friendship. Well, they made comments that we have a lot of friends, but we don't really know friendship. And this goes back to the first century, and just compound that when you get to social media. And so I think with Preston, he gives me that idea of what true friendship is. The philosophers would talk about how true friendship is one soul inside of two bodies. Granted, he's the smarter, stronger, more charming, more handsome version of it. I don't know about Frodo and Samwise, but he's the Brad Pitt to my Jack Black. So I met Preston in Aberdeen. We both were doing PhD work under Simon Gathercole, and walked in and really just realized right off out of the gate that we were kindred spirits. And he has been my number one conversation partner when it comes to Paul and New Testament, all things theology. And that was 20 years ago. And so it's one of those things that we just jump right back in every time we see each other. He doesn't actually know this is dedicated to him yet. So as soon as this recording's over, I'll text him real quick and let him know. His 50th birthday is coming up. And so this was going to be a dedication for his 50th.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's cool. And you were kind enough to introduce me to Preston, and we had him recently a couple of weeks ago. He was actually the last guest. You're the next guest we've had since him here on the channel. And it was, I could easily see in discussing with him how he could be a very kindred spirit and a very thoughtful, just intelligent, but yet easy to talk to guy. And so it was cool seeing the dedication, and it's so rare to find. I mean, everybody has friends, but when you find somebody who you're just like, oh, you get it, and we're doing this thing together, even in our respective areas, like that was really cool to see. I appreciated that. So there's one more quote before we jump into what your book is actually about. There was another quote in your intro that I thought was interesting. I want you to unpack for viewers, because you talked about it was either a teacher or professor. I can't remember if this was undergrad or if it was when you were still in high school, but a professor said, Joe, you got a lot of noise, but I think studying Greek will give you volume. That was a really cool quote, but what did he mean by that for the viewers that haven't read it?
Well, I think the viewers have probably already picked up on me having a lot of noise. I think that was his kind way of saying, you're loud and obnoxious, and you need something to anchor you. This was Dr. Scott Duvall at Ouachita Baptist University.
Okay.
I think I say in this book, it's been a long time since I wrote this book, and so and I may be getting confused with some other things that I wrote, but I think I begin the preface talking about how I was a bastard born on the bayou to a high school student. And so because of that, being given up for adoption, all of my life kind of had daddy issues, and looking for someone like my father figure to see something in me. And honestly, this was the very first time in my life where a Greek professor who I think I made a C my first semester, a B my second semester, and that might have just been by the grace of God and the grace of Duvall. But still, despite having average grades, he made this comment. You have a lot of noise, but I think if you study Hebrew and Greek, it will give you volume. I don't know if it's come true. I think I still am much more loud than I have the volume, but that really was prophetic in my life and transformative. And so that shifted me from just looking at ministry to also looking in the academy. I fell in love with the biblical languages, and that's my favorite course to teach to this day.
What he meant when he said we'll give you volume, and what was the benefit of because a lot of people even question what's the benefit of learning the language with all these translations, with Bible study software these days that can instantly parse things. What was the benefit for you of studying?
I think before, and this is growing up in Christianity in the 90s, we treated the Bible like chewing gum, where we put it in our mouth just to get that flavor, and then we spit it out and go to the next piece of gum. Whereas, the Hebrew word for meditate is hagah, and it's almost like a cow chewing cud, where the cow would chew the cud, swallow it into its first stomach, throw it back up in his mouth. Sorry for being so crass, but this is biology, and would do that over and over again, and that's what produces milk. And I think the biblical languages moved me from chewing gum to chewing the cud. That has really just helped me taste that pure spiritual milk that is hopefully helping me grow up in my salvation.
Yeah, man, that's a great metaphor. I love that. It really does, folks. If you don't have access to the languages, it's not like there's secret salvific knowledge that you're missing. It's just the more you can engage with the text firsthand, the more you can engage with the text firsthand. And
Yeah.
it's always worth the digging to find the
Mm-hmm.
treasure. But that being said, there are Christians who live in their whole lives and die, and who are the most godliest people that you'll ever meet that don't know a lick of Greek or Hebrew. So it's not an
That's
elitist
right.
thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say that I came from South Arkansas, North Louisiana, from a public school where our emphasis was not on English and grammar. It was on football, basketball, and baseball. That was our holy trinity. And so it wasn't like I came from a great academic background and
Right.
like, yeah, I can do Greek and Hebrew. I struggled really, really hard. And it was in that struggle that the Lord met me and helped me fall in love with it. And so if I can do it coming from my background, there's so many of your viewers, I think, could do it as well. But it's best done in community. I would say that as well. And so you can do it solo. John Wesley, I think, did it solo, but it's best done if you can find people around you to struggle with you.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And you're less likely to start your own cult, which is always a danger with any little bit of the language. So,
yes. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the book. I'm gonna read 3 little excerpts from it back to back, and then ask you to unpack it. On page 4, you give an example of how Paul uses a passage from Isaiah and then an excerpt from Meander to make a point. Then a little bit later in the book, I think your son said the Apostle Paul might wear Hebrew underwear, but he has philosophy socks. Or maybe you said the philosophy socks part. He said Hebrew underwear.
Correct.
And then at the end of the book, like when you're kind of summarizing everything on 172, you said, as I've attempted to demonstrate in this book, the apostle is also a polytropic figure. So the book is about Paul being a polytropic figure, wearing Hebrew underwear and philosophy socks, and his interaction with Hebrew prophets and the greco-roman ethicists and philosophers of the day. So, in a nutshell, then, what is a polytropic figure, and why write a whole book on this?
Sure. I'm not sure you're selling this to the audience. They're like underwear, socks.
I know my audience. They're going to be, that's going to catch them. Hebrew underwear and philosophy socks is the selling point.
Right. Well, if Plato was the New Testament for the Greeks, Homer was the Old Testament, and Homer begins the Odyssey, kind of part 2, Luke Acts, if you will, talking about Odysseus, and he calls Odysseus, and it's his favorite nickname for Odysseus, Polytrophos, because he was the man who could become all things to all people according to the matters at hand. And when I heard this, I was like, this actually sounds a lot like 1 Corinthians 9. This sounds like Paul, who become all things to all people. And so I think, I don't think this is intentional by Luke, who wrote Acts, or Paul, but I think if you actually look at the New Testament and look at early Christianity, Paul out Odysseus is Odysseus. Odysseus is a nobody. He's a Nemo compared to the Apostle Paul when it comes to this. And so particularly with Paul being able, as you mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, to seamlessly, like in one breath, be able to quote Isaiah, followed by a contemporary philosopher, and to bring those two together. And so I think that's one of the points where we see Jewish literature and Greco-Roman literature kiss, if you will, whether it's a wet, sloppy kiss or whatever. That's a different. So, but they come together, and Paul shows how they can embrace. And so by polytrophos, it's showing that Paul was a man who many twists and turns, is how many of our English translations do this. But Paul can take what's in Jewish literature and light of the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ, twist that and turn it for the sake of his rhetorical purposes. And just as he could do that, he could also do one of the Stoic philosophers of his day. And that partly goes back to where Paul was raised. Tarsus was the playground where he spent most of his days. And Tarsus was kind of like an Ivy League town. But he was playing hoops and he was up to no good, started making, he ended up leaving Tarsus and going to Jerusalem. And so Paul grew up in an Ivy League town, surrounded by some of the top philosophers of the day, one of which he actually quotes in Acts chapter 17. And so we're not quite sure his education level when he had to go to go to J-Town, to Jerusalem. But my suspicion is that Paul at least had a high school education. And so when in Acts 17, when they come and call him a spermologos, they really have no idea. Paul is able to stand toe to toe with these Stoics just as and Epicureans, the top philosophers of the day, just as much as he's able to stand toe to toe with the best Pharisees, even toe to toe, although on the same team with a Peter and a James and Apollos. And so this is kind of what I'm doing, is showing that Paul is able to be whoever he has to be for the sake of Jesus Christ, in order to reach people for the gospel.
Yeah, you picked out two in particular in the book. You kind of zoom in because Paul he quotes from numerous pagan sources and Jewish sources, but the two that you key in on are the Wisdom of Solomon and Seneca. And you put those in conversation with Paul. So kind of like those three authors, how they approach different things. And so let's talk first about Wisdom of Solomon. First of all, a lot of Christians are not familiar with Wisdom of Solomon. Could you just give what would be your elevator pitch for what the Wisdom of Solomon is as a book? What's its message? What's its purpose? What's its function in the world that Paul came out of?
Sure. Yeah. So the Wisdom of Solomon would have kind of been like a Tim Keller book during the time when Paul was growing up. Okay. So it was part of that apocrypha. We hear the word apocrypha, usually like, woo, say it again, apocrypha, woo. But really, if you read the apocrypha, it's just faithful Jewish writers trying to make sense of the world, asking some of the same questions that the apostle in the New Testament writers are asking. And so between Malachi and Matthew, if you will, the Wisdom of Solomon is one of the most influential writings during this time. It would be one of Tim Keller or C.S. Lewis's top one. And so not necessarily considered the same level of inspiration, but definitely inspiring to read and helpful to read. He's writing to a group of Jewish people who are suffering persecution and also being tempted kind of to be drawn by the Hellenism of the world. And he's calling them to be faithful. But he's asking some of the same questions that Paul is asking, especially in Romans. And so most scholars say that you can't really understand Romans unless you also understand Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom of Solomon was probably somewhere on the desk as Paul was writing Romans. The question is, how close on the desk? Was it in the center or was it off to the side? Some have even argued that the Wisdom of Solomon is Paul's interlocutor, his frenemy that he's fighting with. But what about you, oh man? And the guy who's asking the rhetorical questions is either the Wisdom of Solomon or someone like that. But the Wisdom of Solomon was very popular, not just it was very popular among early Christians, to the point that it actually was accepted into the very first New Testament canon. And so this may get us onto a rabbit trail. We don't have to follow it if you don't want, but with my ADHD, I just feel like I need to mention it. So before we have our New Testament canon that we look at today, there was the Muratorian canon. That was a response to Marcion, this proto-heretic. And so he came out and he had this anti-Semitic canon. And so the proto-Orthodox fathers came, was like, whoa, we got to come up with our own canon. And they actually included the Wisdom of Solomon. And so very, very, very important. It's unfair to kind of hold it to the same level as some of our New Testament writers who have the inspiration of Jesus Christ, but it's on the threshold of that without even realizing it.
Well, you in the book, you talk about places where Paul, you give examples of how he would, like his thought would kind of be in line with what we're reading, Wisdom of Solomon. And I've heard others as well have talked about, especially in Romans 1, there's a lot of overlap. It's like Paul is starting with a lot of common ground that would have been accepted by his fellow Pharisees and other devoted Jews. But then you make a point, like on page 55, you say, where they might diverge, you say the good news of the gospel has plausibly caused Paul to shift the focus of the role of the Spirit in Wisdom 1 from that of bringing the damning thoughts of sinners before the Lord to that of bringing the prayers of the saints to him instead. So where would you see, for those who, I have the benefit of having read and seen this played out, but for viewers that this is new and they're not going to get a copy of your book until it comes out in a couple of months, tease that out a little bit. Are you saying that is Paul negating? Is he correcting? Is he adjusting the thought world of Wisdom of Solomon? or what do you think his relationship was to that book in his own mind with the knowledge of Jesus?
Yeah, sure. Let me start and give a quick summary
Yeah.
of that chapter that you're talking about. One of the most unusual things that we see, not just in Pauline literature, but in New Testament as a whole, is God praying for his people, God's Spirit praying for his people in Romans 8. There's nothing like this in before the New Testament, or even after the New Testament, unless it's been influenced about Paul. There are other people that pray to God for us. We have, Moses, we have Isaiah, we have even Jesus praying for us. But the idea of God, the Spirit, praying for us is unheard of. The closest that we get to it is actually in Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 1. And so, what I'm arguing is what you see in Wisdom, both Paul and the Wisdom of Solomon use the Spirit. And even the Wisdom of Solomon is going to call it the Holy Spirit, but in a different way than what we understand in light of our Christianity. The Wisdom of Solomon has a trinity that's going to be the wisdom of Solomon, Lady Wisdom, that we see like in Proverbs, Logos, like what we see in John 1, the Word, and the Spirit. And so that's going to kind of be that trinity. And so what we see with these figures in the Wisdom of Solomon is the Wisdom of Solomon is writing to a group of people that have been persecuted, and these three figures and some others basically come to the aid of the believers. They're this idea of vengeance is mine, declares the Lord, and so often when he is using the Spirit, it is another one bites the dust. It's how the Spirit is using. God hasn't left them alone. God is using the Spirit of God to take their hidden thoughts up to the throne of God so that God can judge them. And so this is kind of that idea. But for Paul, he's going to use some of these same, what I call personifications, but these same figures that, but his emphasis is not going to be on God's judgment, God opening a can of wrath on his people, but instead, sorry, on those who persecute his people. But in Romans, these are more on the side of the believers who are suffering. And so creation is going to be an example of that as well. At the end times, at the eschaton, on the day of the Lord, Lady Wisdom is, because of the suffering of the saints, of the elect, Lady Wisdom is going to suit up. She's going to get her weapon, and similar to the weapons that we see in Ephesians 6 and the weapons that we see in Isaiah that God puts on, now it's creation who is putting those on. She is suiting up to do battle against those who have oppressed God's people. She gets the rainbow out of the sky, turns it into a bow and arrow. It's really, she has catapults and shooting lightning. And so creation becomes the defender of the people. And we put that in comparison to Romans. Paul's also going to use creation as his figure with his people in suffering, looking forward to the end of the day. But as your audience would know, in Romans 8, it's not creation as a warrior, as a he-man, but instead creation as a fellow sufferer. She's standing on her tippy toes, stretching out her neck, waiting for the daughters and sons of God to be revealed, because when they're revealed, she will be set free. And so Paul's going to take this picture of creation, taking it back to Genesis chapter 3, where creation is cursed because of Adam's sin. Whereas the Wisdom of Solomon is also going to go to Scripture, but going to go to Isaiah and go to Exodus in order to inform what creation is going to do at the end of the day. And so, similar to that with creation, we see it with the Spirit. The Spirit is standing up for the sake of the godly by taking the hidden thoughts, the knowing what's going on and what they're saying, the wordless groans of the wicked up to God for judgment. Whereas for Paul, the Spirit of God is that paraclete that Jesus is going to talk about, that's taking our hidden groans up to the Lord for the sake of God working those for good.
It's a very different way of reading Wisdom of Solomon. Or it's a very different way of understanding the role of the Spirit and of judgment and even God's attitude towards sinners and Gentiles than you find in the Wisdom of Solomon. How, if you mentioned, this being an apocryphal book, or as our Catholic Orthodox friends would say, deuterocanonical.
Deuterocanonical.
So for those, because we do have viewers from those traditions for whom Wisdom of Solomon is part of their canon.
Yeah.
How do they read it? How would you suggest that they read it in a way that doesn't, I don't know. I mean, Protestants don't have a problem disagreeing with or saying Paul disagrees with wisdom or Paul changes or
Yeah.
something like that. But for those in
Mhm.
other traditions, that might be like, whoa, wait a minute. So
Yeah.
what would you do with that if you're coming from another tradition?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I didn't really answer your question, your initial question. I apologize.
Mm,
We do see that Paul is going to do twists and turns even on what Protestants consider canonical.
mm,
So, like in Romans chapter 10, verse 5, Paul's going to set what Moses writes and then one up it with the righteous of faith speaks.
mm.
And so he's going to take Deuteronomy and now give it a remix in light of the righteousness by faith. And so, what Paul is doing with the Wisdom of Solomon is not unlike what he does with Leviticus 18:5b.
Hmm.
And so there are a lot of things that Paul's going to agree with the Wisdom of Solomon. Often it's not so much a disagreement as much as it's a nuance or
Hmm.
how much more type idea, the
Mm,
Calvacomer. So it's even mo better
hmm.
than that. And so I think for Paul, there's going to be more continuity with the Wisdom of Solomon. And honestly, Paul probably would agree more with the Wisdom of Solomon had it not been for Damascus and God knocked him off his donkey on the road to Damascus. And so probably what we see in the Wisdom of Solomon is very similar to what Paul before the Damascus road. And so I think if Paul were having coffee or beer, depending if your audience is Baptist or not, with the Wisdom of Solomon, there would be a lot that they were like, yeah, you too. But then Paul would say, but there's a whole new world in light of what Jesus Christ has done.
Yeah.
And and that was kind of the goal, is not to talk about how how Paul uses the wisdom of Solomon. Many Roman scholars have done that, but
Hmm.
instead to take it up a level to say, if they were having a dialogue, if they were having a conversation, what points would they agree on? What would they disagree? And so what? I think the last time I was on your podcast, I talked about my autistic child that I introduced to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Hmm.
And my child was singing the song wrongly. Rather than saying, nothing really matters, we rejected the Nietzsche
Uh,
quote, but instead, my child was singing, does it really matter to me? And so all of that, looking at the comparison, is to really ask that question, does it really matter? What is the so what? And how does it help us understand Paul, his gospel, the New Testament, Jesus Christ more in light of his one of his contemporaneous Jewish writers that was influential during the time of Paul.
yeah, yeah. It does a really good job, and you do a really good job in the book of situating Paul within his fellow Jews, his fellow
Mhm.
uh, Jewish interactors with culture, because Wisdom of Solomon
Yeah.
does just that. You,
Mhm.
a book that I read after yours. I just finished reading Paul Sloan's book, Jesus and the Law, and
Yeah.
he had. I'm hoping to have him on to talk about how
Good.
his view of Jesus and the law. But I was like,
Mhm.
well, Joey's coming on, and this is a good segue into how would you characterize Paul's view of the law? Because you talk about in the
Mhm.
book, you say there was a quote. You said, "My thesis is that," this is page 62. You say, "My thesis is that Paul personifies the law in an attempt to answer why the Lord sent a law that did not save Israel." And then
Yeah.
then this is a great line. You said, ironically for Paul, it's only when Christ liberates the believer from the law that one is no longer lawless, but through the Spirit, one finally fulfills the law's requirement. And I mean, that is a lot to chew on. And of course, in our last episode, when you were here, Romans 7 is
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
that whole relationship.
Yeah.
Viewers, if you haven't seen our previous episode, I'll link it in the video description.
Mhm.
But that question in particular of Paul
Mhm.
personifying the law,
Mhm.
maybe explain a little bit more of that. How would Paul view the
Sure.
law if he's sitting down and having coffee or a beer with the law? What would the relationship
Sure.
be?
But I wish we could have you, me, and Paul Sloan. Well, the Apostle Paul as well. Paul Sloan is awesome, man.
Mhm.
You have to ask him where he met me, where we first met.
Oh,
We
I will.
have a funny origin story there. But yeah, so I think I mentioned in the introduction that when I looking at Paul with the Wisdom of Solomon, I'm not trying to read Paul against Judaism,
Hmm.
or but Paul within Judaism, for
Hmm.
whatever that means. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. For your audience that are familiar with this term, I follow an apocalyptic reading of Paul, so I'm an apocalyptic Paul person,
Hmm.
and of course, each person that defines that differently.
Right.
But with the idea of the personification of the law, I mentioned before that the Wisdom of Solomon uses personification, taking these abstract ideas and presenting them like people, or most likely Paul considers these as true intermediate figures. But that gets us beyond the case. And both the Wisdom of Solomon and Paul in Romans use these personifications slash figures of these powers, and they always use them in context with the problem of evil, with the Odyssey. And so this is something often in Roman scholarship is like, is sin just a rhetorical device, or does Paul consider it a cosmological power? And so I want to say, let's move beyond that discussion, because that's kind of a bit of a stalemate. And let's see how Paul uses it. And so in Romans, Paul is like the only place, is the chief place that Paul uses personification. And outside of Romans, we don't see it very often, but he always uses it in context of the problems of evil. And one of those problems is if Christ is the way of salvation, then why did God give the law in the first place? And so Paul uses personification to deal with it. And so we see, for example, in Romans 5, the law, it slips in the back door in order to increase trespass. And so it seems like in Romans that the law is on the same side as sin and death. But if you have any Harry Potter fans in your group, I think the law is like Snape. So it seems like Snape is on the side of Voldemort. Sorry for the spoilers for any of you who have not read it or watched the shows. But in the end, Snape was working for Dumbledore all the while. And so I do think that we see that it's the spirit in the law helps us actually live according to the law, and fulfill the law of Christ that Paul will go on to talk about.
There's a big, it's a point worth making that no one, or well, some people do, but you are not saying, and I would join you in not saying, Paul is not speaking or teaching against the law or trying to get Christians away from the law in what it was intended to do and its purpose. But he's showing that I think you talked about, like you said, the law is acting like a double agent. And only looking back through the events of the gospel and the sending of the Spirit do all the pieces fit together. Before then, they're just kind of like, how do you fit these? The call of the law to this, but then our woeful failing, but it is still good. And Jesus says, not one jot or tittle will pass away. And he seemed to not be anti-law. So that's a whole area of study, I guess, a whole
That's right. Yeah.
area
And it goes back to the
scholarship.
Romans 7 book, because I do think that Paul's personification in this discussion with the law is showing Paul's Hebrew underwear. And so I think this is one of the intramural conversations that he's having. This is inside baseball for Paul. So,
there's been a lot of, it's unfortunate that throughout Christian tradition, there's been a lot of, not all of it malicious, but there's been a lot of caricaturing and a lot of misunderstanding and distorting of all of Judaism, but particularly of the law, and some artificial distinctions that have been introduced, and the dichotomy between law and gospel. And this book is, I think, doing a good job, along with others that I've been reading and talking about here on the channel lately, of sort of sifting back, like removing that veneer of later Christian theology and kind of getting back to, okay, what was going on in the first century. And that's what's so good about you interacting with Wisdom of Solomon and Paul. And then you also will switch gears now, because the other person you interact with from the other tropos, the other place where Paul is Seneca. And you now I was not I had one of my best friends in high school. His name was Seneca. He was from Taiwan, and when he came and moved here, his parents said, "What's a good English name?" And they picked Seneca, which always made me laugh. But he was one of my really good friends. But that's every time I see the word Seneca, I just think of my friend from Taiwan that I used to watch Dragon Ball Z VHS copies with from Taiwan. Who is Seneca in the first century, and why did you pick him of all the people that Paul cites to have him interact with?
Or let me say one last thing about the Paul within Judaism comment, and I'll bring Seneca here to make a segue of it.
All right.
Often when evangelicals especially have written putting Paul in comparison with another work. It's making Paul the hero, and that other work just becomes a foil for that. And yes, Paul is my hero, but it's not that I love the Wisdom of Solomon less, it's that I love Paul more. Same thing with Seneca. So this is not me looking at, hey, Paul's a great guy, and there's boo, Wisdom of Solomon, boo, Seneca.
Right.
I really like Wisdom of Solomon. I really like Seneca. And so, yes, I tip my hat to Paul. It's not like I'm painting these guys as, I'll get you, yeah, put in your little dog too. This is not a wicked for good type moment that we see. And so I would say that. So hopefully that comes across in the prose that I'm using the Wisdom of Solomon as someone that I respect. And I hope that whoever wrote the Wisdom of Solomon, some think that it was Philo, some think that it was Apollos that we see in the New Testament. But I hope that this person did end up having a conversation with Paul and became one of the leaders of the early church. So back to your question of Seneca. So Seneca is the most prolific Roman Stoic in the first century. Now, when we think of Stoicism, often we think of Marcus Aurelius. That's how I think everyone pronounces his name. Marcus Aurelius, he was the one who wrote Meditations. He is kind of the Taylor Swift of Roman Stoicism.
Sure.
He's like pop Stoicism. He's fantastic. I love Taylor Swift. Yeah, don't get me wrong. But Taylor Swift is not Beethoven. Taylor Swift is not Mozart. And Seneca would be the Mozart of the first century. Seneca was born in Spain and was raised in Egypt about the same time that Jesus was in Egypt, according to what we see with Matthew. Seneca made his way to Rome. He wanted to be a philosopher, a preacher, a teacher, but his dad's like, nope, you got to do politics. And so Seneca becomes a Roman senator, and he gets sent to exile by Claudius, but he does get the last laugh with Claudius, but that's a different story. After Claudius dies, if you remember in Romans, the Jewish people were expelled by Claudius, and after Claudius dies, they're able to come back. The Jewish people are able to come back to Rome. So also when Claudius dies, Seneca is able to come back to Rome. You probably are familiar with his brother, even if those of you weren't familiar with Seneca, be it this one or the one from Taiwan. His brother was Gallio, who was the governor of Corinth, who actually adjudicated on behalf of the believers for the believers in Corinth. And so this is his brother. He was the teacher of Nero. Seneca was, and even at the very beginning, knew that he was kind of raising an Anakin Skywalker type guy. This guy was going to be the Darth Vader of his time. And Nero ended up having Seneca executed alongside of Paul and Peter and company. So he also, I think, was on the threshold of Christianity without realizing it. So born around the same time as Jesus, died around the same time as Paul.
Do you think there's no way to prove this whatsoever, just a hunch. Do you think Seneca had any interaction either with Paul or with early Christians?
Yeah. My hunch is yes. When Paul in Acts chapter 28, he had appealed to Caesar. During this time period, Nero was out chasing skirts, is how we would say in the South. I guess chasing togas. So the very first time of Nero's life, he actually wasn't ruling. And so Seneca and Burrus was the military leader of the time. They were the ones who were in charge of Rome. And so it's very likely if Paul actually goes before Nero, before the emperor, it's before Seneca. We do have statements that there were letters, correspondence between Paul and Seneca. We have some of those, but they're actually spurious. They were written much later. But it may be that there actually was some genuine interaction, letters written between Seneca and Paul. But again, we just can't say. The early church fathers claimed Seneca as our very own Seneca. And so there is some sniffs, some hints that Seneca might actually have become a believer. Dante, if you remember, puts Seneca just like that first step of Hades, so kind of the limbo part of it's just right there.
Yeah, before it's not gets too bad.
Yeah, exactly. Almost like the silver medal guy as opposed to the gold medal. It's like just the difference between a gold medal runner and a silver medal is like it's like half a second. That's kind of where Dante puts him.
Yeah. It's cool to think about. Well, one, it's cool to think about these people from the outside known pagan world, how they may or may not have been influenced by the gospel, and we know. I mean, God did so much outside the pages of Scripture that we'll never know until the new creation. And so it's a neat thought experiment. Like, yeah, I wonder if any of them ever came to faith. But it's also a helpful thing because it just anchors Seneca in that time period, and you can wrap your
That's
mind
right.
around, okay, all right, when I'm reading something by him, I'm reading something contemporaneous with Paul. Um,
Correct.
I think that's helpful. Whereas, like, Homer is centuries before, and
Mhm.
others are centuries after. So it helps to not it helps to unflatten some of the Stoicism,
Yeah.
Greco-Roman,
Mhm.
those kind of writings.
Yeah.
You there was a quote about Seneca and where Paul may be differing from him. You said, this is page 104. You said, over against the Stoics' philosophical heroes on their metaphorical crosses, Paul's Messiah
Mhm.
was literally crucified in order to rescue the church from this present evil age.
Mhm.
And then you go on, and you're talking about a man named Regulus, and you say if
Mhm.
people knew of Regulus as much as the evidence for his popularity suggests, then it's likely some first century believers viewed his legend as a lens and a point of comparison with Christ's death. So, but I had never heard of Regulus. I'm not a reader of
Yeah.
Seneca, and so this is why your book was
Right.
so helpful.
Mhm.
Who was what's the legend of Regulus, and why? What's
Sure.
surprising about that?
Yeah, it's so good. It's one of the best stories in history. It goes to the Punic Wars. If you have anyone in your audience that's involved in Hollywood, this would make a great blockbuster. It would be so great. Just don't, yeah, yeah. So yeah, pitch it to James Gunn or whatever. But just as popular as George Washington is for us as Americans,
Mm,
Regulus was for the Greco-Roman world, especially for the Romans. I'd never heard of Regulus outside of Harry Potter. He's one of the characters in Harry Potter until I came across Seneca, and I'm reading him, one of his essays, and he makes a comment about the greatest three deaths in history.
mm,
Socrates, of course, Cato, which is a different story, and Regulus. And I was like, Socrates I've heard, and Cato's I heard, but who in the Hades is Regulus? And
yeah.
so did a deep dive. And so Regulus was a military leader who won a great navy battle
Mm,
that gave the Romans an entryway to get to Africa to take on Carthage. He had a lot of prisoners of war, a lot of booty that he sent back to Rome to prepare a triumphal procession, which usually at this time is only meant for emperors. And so
mm,
this guy is up there. They go through Africa. They're taking, another one bites the dust. They're kicking tail. They're opening up cans of whoop rats all over the place until they get to Carthage. And then Regulus decide in his mercy to offer them a peace deal. But the peace deal was basically, you're just going to be absolutely demolished. And so the Carthaginians were like, give us a chance and we'll think about it. Meanwhile, there's this anaconda type figure that's starting to attack all of Regulus's soldiers. And so Regulus has this epic mythic battle with this supernatural anaconda, it seems.
mm,
And then, meanwhile, while this is happening, the Carthaginians send to the Spartans to ask this guy named Xanthippus to come and help us fight against Regulus. And so
mm,
Xanthippus comes and he's like, you know what? You got a secret weapon that the Romans don't know about. Elephants. Why don't you make your elephants like tanks? And so Regulus, despite being the great Roman war hero, he had never faced elephants before. And so the Spartan and the Carthaginians came out, and it was the worst loss in Roman history.
mm,
And so it's a day that will be ever painted in black, according to the Roman propaganda. So it was absolutely horrible. They destroy most of Regulus's army. They get him, and they lead him in a triumphal procession,
mm,
mocking him. And I'll cut the story short. You've read the book. You can get to it. But eventually, they crucify
mm,
Regulus and to mock him. And but even as he's being crucified, it's not meant as shame. He is glorified. He overcomes the Carthaginians by his crucifixion. Worship is given up in his name, in honor of him in the heavens. And anyway, so the early church fathers, as early as the second century, so the next generation of Christians, they're going to begin to point to Regulus to say, hey, in elementary school, you guys are talking about this Regulus guy, and they would use it in one or two different ways. One, to say, hey, if you can't say Jesus's cross was shameful, because if you also say that Regulus's cross, and so they would use it as an entryway to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus and how he overcame evil by his crucifixion. Another way is going back to that one upping the ante. You're Regulus, Regulus, Regulus. Oh, you guys are all about Regulus, but you know what? Our little girls are dying in a greater way than Regulus. Our old men are dying, being martyred, even greater than Regulus. And so, but yeah, so I look at that picture. So when Paul comes and talks about how by the cross, God stripped down the enemies and he led them in a triumphal procession, that for many of Paul's audience that have been grown up on Regulus, or maybe like their version of Superman, this would be up, up, and away, or it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superman type of reference.
I'd never heard of Regulus before, and that was a fascinating account, because growing up, you always hear preaching of like the cross was universal. Well, I mean, it was scorned and it was shameful, but just across the board, uniform. That's the view of the cross. So to get an example of outside of the gospel, it provides, like the tomb of the unknown, or the monument to the unknown God in Acts 17 or something. It provides one of these touch points that the gospel. And then now when I go back and reread Paul, that's going to be in my head of like, how is he riffing on this idea? It shows to me, it's a lot of like what Tolkien and Lewis talked about, that God hasn't left himself without these seeds of the gospel, these previews of coming attractions in the pagan world.
That's right.
To which he was going to go to.
Yeah. And that wasn't Tolkien or Lewis, that was Paul. Obviously they're growing up, but is it Acts 13 where he says to the Lystrans and the Derbians, God did not leave you without witness. And so I think Tolkien and Lewis are picking up on that. And so I think for Paul, guys like Regulus, guys like Seneca would be, is it Seneca that talks about how God gave the pagan world these little candles to get them to time, but Jesus Christ was the sunrise. And so Regulus would be one of those candles. But you're right, Regulus is the exception that proves the rule, that the cross is this picture of shame, but through Regulus' shame came glory and honor. And so it makes a great candle to the sunrise of the gospel.
Man, I love that, because viewers, sometimes, not all, but I have some viewers that, again, I joked before we started that they always like to say I'm surrounded by idols, because they see childhood superhero toys and they just think pagan gods, pagan. I'm just like, what kind of miserable childhood did you have growing up?
But I got Rocky Balboa, Superman.
Oh, you're surrounded by idols too. Good. I'm glad.
I've got a bunch of them. I won't show them all, but they're not in on it. So kindred spirits there.
Yeah, well, this is why, though. I think when people ask me like, why should Christians read other works outside of the Bible, whether it's what I'm more familiar with, which is ancient Near East stuff, or whether it's your area of expertise, greco-roman stuff, people would say, all you need is the Bible. All you need is the Bible. Why do you read that other stuff? It shouldn't matter. And I just say, well, it seemed to matter to Paul. It seemed to matter to Moses. It seemed to matter to these writers of scripture that could exegete their culture and use it. I just, that's what I see doing. I see all of pop culture. All of pop culture is in some way, in some distorted way, or in some, I like the example, a candle versus a sunrise. It's they're reaching, they're grasping, but they can never grasp the fullness. Jesus had to come down. The gospel had to be given in its fullness. But once we do grasp it, then we just start. You can't help but see echoes of the true myth throughout the world.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, you also talked about the Convivia, is I'm saying that right?
The Convivia.
The Convivia celebrations. And for those who are unfamiliar, again, what is a Convivia? What was a Convivia? And how does that aspect of Greco-Roman culture inform how we read the New Testament at all?
Or this is the chapter I'm most nervous about. So Regulus is the one that I love the most. It's such a fun chapter. I wish I could just put it at the very beginning of the book. But this chapter is on homoerotic activity in the first century, which is so controversial. I'm a peacemaker. I don't like anybody to be mad at me. I'm a people pleaser. And so this one is probably the most controversial. But in Seneca's epistle, he talks about these Roman banquets that were really popular. And he puts these Roman banquets in this decline narrative, similar to what we see in Romans 1:18 through 32. The wrath of God is being poured about on the injustice, and how people, they saw God, they rejected God, and God handed them over. Very similar type of context that we have. And so Seneca would talk about the topsy-turvy of Rome, the moral rust of Rome. And he's writing this not to get into the homoerotic activity that we'll talk about here in a moment. And I'll get your advice on how to talk about that before I get into it. But for Seneca, Rome is so totally depraved that the only way out is lady philosophy, true philosophy, because you have to think about the right things about God in order to be set free. And so you're going to have very similar type ideas, because if you remember Romans 1:18 through 32, Paul's not really talking about the fall of man. He's setting up kind of the darkness to give the truth of the gospel that can really bring redemption. But in this, he talks about how men forsook God's the nature, what they were meant to be. And yet so much more. And they become gluttons, and they begin to eat more than they need to, drink more than they need to. Very similar again to what we see in Isaiah, where the people would eat so much they would vomit on their tables so they could eat more. The same type of idea. And Seneca would talk about how the smell of their depravity was in their flatulence and burping. And again, this is like an elite Roman senator who's talking about this. But he says that really what happens is that because men left the divine design, so also did their women. And they began to drink just as much as men. They began to fight just as much as men. They began to eat just as much as men. And because of that, they began to face the same diseases that men had faced. And so Seneca is going to have this idea of men forsaking, and the example of men forsaking led to the females forsaking that. And this is where he gets into the homoerotic activity. Rated R, PG-13, PG, G. Do you want me to talk about this, or do you want me to?
This is all you, brother. You wrote the book. You're the one that has to defend it.
Well, this is like the 6th version of this chapter of continuing to try to be honest and be blunt, because when you start talking about this in the Greco-Roman world, they're saying things that would make Miley Cyrus blush, or Dennis Rodman blush. I mean, and so we think that what goes on in America is depraved, but the Roman world. And so I use examples of the banquets that are doing that to give us a parallel of what may be happening when Paul talks about women homoerotic activity and the male homerotic activity in Romans 1. So you give me a rating, and I'll if you want me to talk about it at all.
No, I would love to hear. And we're super candid here. This is not a channel for just the nice people who like the Precious Moments figurines in their Christian bookstore. We don't mind. We have a whole course on sexuality where we just talk frankly and honestly, without being crass, obviously. But it is important to be straightforward. And in this discussion, use this as a touch point to then respond. Sure. It felt like what Seneca was describing, and what you think you're suggesting Paul is interacting with in Romans, particularly in Romans 1, was a general like hedonism on steroids. Debauchery. Whereas some Christians grab onto Romans 1 and they key specifically in on the same sex issue. That this is what it's all about. That is just in Romans 1, like it's symptomatic of something much deeper and much bigger going on, just like in Sodom and Gomorrah, to the point that Ezekiel later doesn't even really mention the actual sexual acts when he's describing how bad Sodom was. It's not that those sexual acts weren't bad; they were abhorrent in story, but there was so much more abhorrent and so much more. And so, is that what you're seeing Paul doing in Romans 1? Is that what you think the view that Seneca would have as a figure within that society? Critique, like today, people in Congress will bemoan the state of America. And usually it's when the other person is in power, the other team's in power. They'll talk about how bad the country is. And then when they get in power, all of a sudden we're in a golden age. Where would you put Paul and Seneca on that scale, or what were they doing with their thoughts?
I think Paul and Seneca are on the same page at this point. And so both of them are looking at the perversion of humanity. They've forsaken God's good, perfect plan. And the example of that, an illustration that both of them use, is this picture of homoerotic activity because of men's sin. So both of them are going to blame it on man first. The women have forsaken. And the picture of that is this lesbian-like activity, probably related to orgy styles that are connected to the banquets that were really popular in Rome and Corinth, where Paul is writing from. And maybe that even, and Bruce Winters talks about this quite a bit, that when Paul is talking about a believer hooking up with a prostitute in 1 Corinthians, that it's this convivia, these banquet type activities that are happening. And so maybe that some of the Christians are continuing this activity of going to these parties. And it wasn't the parties in themselves, although those were connected with idolatry. Often they'd leave a chair open for whichever god was sponsoring it. They'd pour some out for their homies or for their gods at this point. But then the after party that was connected with that often involved orgy-like activity, where would be connected to like the Jeffrey Epstein reports. And so what Paul and Seneca are portraying are what's happening on the Epstein Island,
right? Or at a Diddy party,
good, maybe even a better illustration. And so that's the picture that they're talking about here. And so putting that in context helps us understand that what Paul is talking about is something that is extraordinary, way and beyond. And honestly, we don't know how much of these activities that Seneca lists really, whether it was part of the rumor mill or whether it was part of something that literally was happening. I expect it to be the latter. But nonetheless, Paul is drawing on the same type of argument, except his conclusion is going to be faith in Jesus Christ rather than faith in philosophy.
Right. That's a key difference. Is the Stoics believe? So was it Epicureans that would have embraced the more hedonistic, not necessarily the debauchery to that extent, but what is that? Am I getting that right? Stoics and Epicureans were sort of like
maybe the Epicureans followers. Epicurus himself, pleasure is the chief end of humanity, but Epicurus himself would say, but that's also in moderation.
Right.
But Epicurus's followers didn't really follow along those lines. In their gardens, where Epicurus would like to teach, they would often have their own prostitutes and sex workers or whatever it may be during that time. But so Seneca would definitely think he would look at the Epicureans like Paul would look at the Sadducees. Even though they actually come from the same root.
And Stoicism was more overcome that because why? What was?
Because virtue. It's not about pleasure. It's about virtue.
Okay.
It's about wisdom. Yeah. So they're going to push back and argue that no, it's not about pleasure. It's about joy. This long-lasting joy that comes actually from depriving yourself rather than giving in to your desires and seeking suffering.
It's so fascinating to me because, again, in both of those traditions, you can see a distortion of a good thing. In an Epicurean approach or a pseudo-Epicurean is a very Jewish idea of this world being a good thing and pleasure being good.
Love, treat yourself.
I love the treat yourself reference to Parks and Rec you had in the book.
No regrets.
So there's an echo of that. But then in the Stoics, you also see a seed of something good, which is that denial of immediate pleasure for the sake of something better and of honor and virtue and all that. It's just both are missing the foundational grounding of that in the nature and the reality of God, and the Jesus as the culmination of all that. There's so many ways you could go. If you were a Paul into this culture, that you could take that and have some really fruitful discussions. Um,
Yeah.
do you think the convivia concept, do you think this is why, or maybe one of the reasons why Paul and the other apostles would be so concerned, not concerned, but would be so insistent that when Christians gather for their
Mhm.
love feast, that it
Yeah,
not become a hedonistic love feast,
exactly.
the propriety in worship and that kind of stuff. Is
Yeah.
that, how much of a factor do you think that would play?
I think it's big. And again, Bruce Winters talks about this after Paul left Corinth in his book. And it may be that not properly discerning the body, these agape feasts, the love feast, is that they're bringing some of these practices from the world into Corinth, the church going wild.
Mm,
Because of that, some of them had gotten sick and some of them have even died. And so there may be an aspect of that everything is permissible with me, a type of Epicurean idea that's connected to the convivium.
yeah. That's a really, yeah, that's, I'm going to chew on that more because that's a helpful background information. Where, if somebody wants to read, by the way, if somebody's like, oh, this sounds really interesting. I mean, you held up the Loeb
Mhm.
Classical Edition
Mhm.
for Seneca. Would that be the a good go-to, or is there?
Yeah, yeah, especially if you have if you like to see the original language. So the Loeb is a biglot. It has like the Latin on one side and the Greek
Mhm.
and the English on the other. There's not a great English translation. The Loeb does the best. What I've been doing is I'll just like cut the Latin, cut and paste it because I have access to it, and you
Mhm.
get access to the original language online. And I've been putting it in AI
Mm.
and saying, "Give me the NIV translation of this." Or the NLT translation or ESV,
Yeah.
whichever one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it AI is doing a better job than what our publishers, what these guys have done. And some of these are outdated,
Mhm.
but you could say dumb it down a little bit or keep the poetic flair. And so that might be something that you would do if you don't want to buy anything. But I prefer the Lobes
Yeah,
at
yeah.
this point, just because there's not a great translation out
Yeah, that's actually, that's a really one of the more helpful ways to use AI is
there.
getting access to information in other languages. Just with the caveat of, remember, AI is only as good as what you feed it, and you have to always fact check because it's not
Correct.
actually,
Yeah.
the eye is not an actual thing.
Yeah.
It's predictive. We've had a buddy who ran the live stream for us. Gregory Richardson is
Mhm.
a AI architect and a
Okay.
cybersecurity expert, and he's been on the channel and talked all about the good uses of AI, of which
Yeah.
he has many. And I think that'd be an example of
Mhm.
one, is giving you access to something. Always with the caveat of it's still not an actual intelligence. So double check. I'm gonna actually try that though,
Mhm.
because I
Yeah.
do not have. I might have digital access. I have to look at my Logos collection and see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you can find digital access if you just like type in Epictetus or Socrates, original Greek. You can get it and cut and paste it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
the lobes are probably the go-to.
I know some viewers will want to. We viewers, whenever we talk about any ancient resources, I always have viewers asking where they can get access to it. There's a hunger
Good.
for
Yeah.
this kind of stuff, but unfortunately, sometimes it gets fed by dubious sources. Or I just reviewed an Ethiopian Bible, which is just it's nonsense. So, but Loeb is not. Loeb Classical is a very well respected, in every theological and historic classicist library. You'll find that.
Just some of it's more like King James version rather than. I mean, they're continued updated. It just depends on
Yeah,
which version that you have.
yeah.
Hey, you can also put in your, if any of your readers are interested, I did an interview with the Daily Stoic
Mhm.
on Stoicism and Christianity. I'll give you that link
Yes.
that could introduce them more to Stoicism in general and early Christianity.
That'd be great, because I do have friends, viewers of the channel, and friends of mine, like jujitsu friends. Stoicism is real big in
Hmm.
jujitsu circles,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's, I think the Joe Roganization of America has one of the good things is it's introduced people to these
Mm.
larger ideas, and looking at things throughout history, and Stoicism's one of those. I mean, every podcaster, in the combat sports world would probably be like, read Marcus Aurelius, the Taylor Swift. So yes, I will put if you send me that link after we're done,
Yeah,
I'll stick
yeah.
that in the video description so viewers can have a little guidance into that area,
Mm.
that are curious about it. Well, mentioning Stoics, let me ask you, there's one more question, and then I want to end on a quote for you to unpack. On page 160, when you talk about eschatology and Stoic eschatology, and you say, although the Stoic occasionally conveys a, quote, skeptical uncertainty about life after death, he does not seem to waver on life after death, when God reboots the cosmos and makes it new. Now, N.T. Wright kind of popularized that phrase back when Surprised by Hope came out, of life after death. So real quick, paint a picture for us of what was the Stoic, what was a Stoic approach to that question, and then Paul's approach.
Yeah. So again, the Stoics are not monolithic. They don't have a canon. And so this Stoic is specifically drawing on Seneca. But Seneca had this idea. And at one hand, he's like, well, maybe when we die, we die. Ivan Draco was right. There's nothing after death. And if that's the case, we don't remember what was before our birth. And so we don't remember anything about our death. So we don't have to be afraid of death. Death has no fear in it. But later on in his life, he started looking more at metaphysics, at life after death, and seems to have this idea that when we die, he's not quite sure what happens immediately. Very similar to our discussion of the intermediate state. Like, are we soul sleeping? Are we asleep in the arms of Jesus? Do we go to Abraham's bosom? He said Abraham. Do we go to heaven? Does our soul go, and later on, the soul and body meets? That same type of idea. Seneca wasn't quite sure, but he did believe that there would come the final day. At this final day, all the kingdoms would fall down, all the enemies would be destroyed. Sorry, I'm getting 1 Corinthians 15 mixed up. But even death would die. And so very similar to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and God would become all in all. And so the death, this day of destruction is a day where the one hand it's by floods, on the other hand it's by ice, and on the other hand it's by, if you have three hands, by fire. And so there's this day that is coming. And at this point, all life will be extinguished, and God will become all in all. And then, almost like the Matrix, if you have audience that watches the Matrix, God reboots the Matrix, and we do it all over again. And so the same friends you had in this life, you'll have in the next life. And some Stoics had this idea that, so it is a bodily resurrection. So you're going to have your same body that you have. Some think that with each iteration, it's getting better and better and better. Some think that it's just kind of a circle on and on again. And so we're continuing to relive this.
Yeah. So Paul would come in, and what would be are the areas of continuity and discontinuity most prominent for Paul?
Yeah, well, I'd say, first of all, Paul's not very clear on the intermediate state. I'm not quite sure Paul has it figured out either. In 2 Corinthians, he talks about to be absent of the body, and, we won't be found naked. And so Paul kind of flirts with the Platonic Stoic idea, but then comes back to it. It seems like Seneca's best guess is that our soul will go up and share with the gods, and we'll shine bright like a diamond. We'll be shining like stars in heaven, similar to what we see in Philippians, until that day, at least for the righteous. But for Paul, of course, when Christ comes back with a shout and the voice of the archangel, pretty sure that's going to be when the saints come marching in. Being a Saints fan, that when Christ comes back, he will beat the devil because the devil is bad, and give us the peace, the shalom, the kingdom on earth forever. And so for Paul, it's not going to be circular or cyclical. Instead, it's going to be forever. You can be small, but so that type of idea. But Paul will draw a lot on this in 1 Corinthians 15, where he spells out the resurrection. He's using Stoic imagery and vocabulary quite a bit in that. But again, death is going to be destroyed. God's going to become all in all, and we will dwell with God forever, like what we see in 1 Thessalonians.
The idea that some Stoics, at least Seneca or others, may have had a concept of a bodily renewal, a bodily reboot, is a very important point, because a lot of times I just assume all Greco-Roman thought was Platonic. You're everyone's longing to get away from this body, which is a prison. So the idea that some might say, no, bodily is what we're created for, at least in some sense, that's again a good entryway into what we do see in the Hebrew Bible, which is bodily resurrection is it. Without it, you're nothing.
That's right.
There's so much areas where, again, to be a fly on the wall between Paul in his Roman jail cell and Seneca, if they ever had these discussions, it would have been fascinating to sit in and listen. You've closed the quote that I wanted to close with it's actually at the beginning of the book, and then you take the whole rest of the book to sort of unpack it. But you said on page 7, only when we see Paul's letters as mundane can we appreciate their sacredness, and only as we examine them as finite can we conceive of how infinite they truly seem. That's very Kung Fu Master Zen sounding. So I wanted to let you unpack it a little bit for us.
It's like the old Bruce Lee movies where they have the tape over. Like,
yes, actually, it reminds me. Did you ever see the movie? Oh man, now I'm blanking on it. Anyway, it's the Ben Stiller movie with all the superhero mystery men, where there's one his superpower is he just says things very mysteriously. When you master your enemy, your enemy becomes your master, or something like, unless you master your enemy becomes your, and then Ben Stiller eventually starts guessing it in advance and be like, what are you going to say this? It reminded me of that. Mystery Men, underrated 90s classic, got terrible reviews, but I thought it was hilarious. So how has this not become, Kung Fu Panda sage-like wisdom? What are you trying to say? Because it really is profound. How can we, seeing Paul's letters as mundane, show how they actually are sacred? How seeing them as finite shows they're infinite? What did you mean by that?
Yeah. I think you have to earn the right to claim that the New Testament is sacred. You have to earn the right to say that the New Testament is unique. You have to earn the right. And so for many of us, we assume that as believers, the Bible, there's nothing like the Bible.
Right.
But once you actually put the Bible in context, you see that there are similarities, there are parallels, there are coherences. And so that putting it in its original culture, putting it side by side with other literature things, you understand that a lot of things that Paul is saying is pedestrian. It is using common tropes and ideas. I learned the secret of contentment. We look at it because we're not familiar with the literature around them. We're like, bars, Paul. But then you see this phrase, secret of contentment is everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere during this time. And so once we realize that Paul is communicating in common language in order to reach those people, that's when we begin to see the great difference of it, is that the secret of contentment is found in the person of Jesus Christ, who suffered in every way that we have suffered, yet did not sin, or attempted to bring in Hebrews at this point. And so by putting it alongside of these others, we realize where Paul is similar to those, but it does give us the right to be able then to say, yes, but still, there's nothing like the gospel. How long, how high, deep. I think it was Augustine who said, I have read great and transformative things in the likes of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. But one thing I've never read is any of them saying, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. And so once we actually see what's going on in this and see the similarities, that helps us see the great difference of how great and mighty and wonderful is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so for some of us, we look at the Bible and it makes us yawn because we think it's just kind of same old. But once we put it in the same context of this, we really begin to move from yawning to gaping at how beautiful it is.
It reminds me of when I watched Hamilton, the musical. You can watch Hamilton and not know any of hip hop references or modern pop culture references that's used throughout Hamilton, and you'll still come away appreciating wow, that's a really good musical.
Exactly.
But when you do catch all of the allusions that Lin-Manuel Miranda's putting in there, you're like, you appreciate it on a deeper level. You're like, oh man, he's riffing on this particular
Beastie Boys, Boys to Men, exactly.
So doing that with Paul, or doing it with the Old Testament, reading the Baal myth or Babylonian theodicy or any of these other ancient Near East texts, to me, it does the same thing. It's giving you the nods that the authors of Scripture are making to, or the culture that they're coming out of, I resonated with that quote because it does exactly what you're saying. it makes it more sacred, not less, when you see it as part of that community, that culture that they're in. Because it points, you mentioned Bruce Lee, the famous Enter the Dragon. He says it's like a finger pointing to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you'll miss the heavenly glory. Very famous Bruce Lee line.
Good. Yeah,
but it's like that is see the references, but don't if you only see the references, if you only see the Seneca nods or the Wisdom of Solomon echoes, then and don't go where Paul is pointing, then you do miss, as Bruce Lee says, the heavenly glory in a very literal way. Man, so the book, do you have an idea? Have you gotten a publication or release date yet? Do you know?
I think February, but you can already order it on Amazon.
Yes, folks, if you're if you're interested in this, if this discussion's right up your alley, or you want to know more about how does Paul fit within these two worlds that he's walking with one foot in each, or actually with both feet in both, I would say. But go on Amazon, pre-order Joey's book. I read it; it's great. You'll gain a lot that you didn't know. You've dug up stuff that I have not seen in certainly in popular level Christian writing, or it's, I don't want to say popular level, like anybody can read your book. It's not scholarly level in the sense that it's prohibitive to people that aren't scholars, but it's also not just, it's not like just devotional fluff. Like you're interacting with historical and philosophical and scholarly concepts. So it's this cool in between. It's like what we try to be here at Disciple Dojo. It's like this conversant, it's scholarly and meaty, but not alienating for people that are interested and motivated readers. I think that's how I would put it. So check it out. Thank you so much for letting me take a look at it. I'm excited for readers to see it. And I'll put a link to it, folks, in the video description below. Do you have anything that you're working on that's coming down the pipeline in the next month or year? What should viewers know about what Joey Dodson's up to?
Sure. I just turned in a manuscript of Jesus, Hercules, and the Gospel Truth that compares Jesus with the other major superhero of the day, Hercules, who is the only figure that we have that was a son of God who descended into Hades and came back, spoke to a woman who was weeping at his pyre, and then went and sat at the right hand of Zeus / Jupiter. And so I'm really excited about that one. Probably the funnest book that I've ever written. It's coming out with B&H Academic. I don't know the timeline exactly. I'm also writing the hard sayings of the Bible. I don't know if you remember that. It came out in like the 90s.
Yeah,
do you have that one?
It's above. You can't see it. The shelf above this.
Sweet. Yeah. So, is, I think, who edited the first one. But they're redoing that. It's a reboot.
Is it? Who all is? The first one was, I think, 4. It was hard sayings of Old Testament, hard sayings of Paul, hard sayings of Jesus. Walt Kaiser did. That's why he was my professor. He did Old Testament, and then Manfred Brock and I can't remember the other two. Is it going to be like that? Is it going to be a compilation? Are you one of the editors, one of the contributors? Is it?
No, I'm one of the contributors. I'm doing Romans.
Okay.
So, I'm doing that. So that's my next project. And then as soon as that's over with, I'm writing a book called All Trails Lead to Romans.
Okay.
And so it's an introduction, not just to Romans, but also to Pauline theology. It looks at different perspectives and helps you see Romans in a whole new light. Playing off of the All Roads Lead to Rome, All Trails. So we're like hiking through Romans. And so combining two of my things that I love the best, hiking and the Bible.
Yeah, you're an avid hiker.
Things are together. And then the Colossians and Romans commentaries. I'm writing a commentary on Colossians and a commentary on Romans as well in the future.
What series will those be for? Do you know?
The Colossians commentary is in the Christian Standard commentary. They're rebooting the old NAC, the New American Commentary. Do you remember those? Blue and pink ones. They're redoing that. They already have some. Craig Blomberg just came out with Matthew this past month. So I'm doing Colossians and Philemon for that one. Okay. And the other one's it's a Brill monograph. So it's in the Brill exegetical series, and so it'll be meant for the ivory tower. But so I'm trying to do some of these more popular, accessible works that complement the ivory tower and vice versa.
Yeah, well, both are needed. I think you're doing great work on both fronts, and I love the fact that you're writing so much about Romans, just because it's refreshing seeing a kindred spirit. Somebody who gets Romans 7 right, it will always have my appreciation.
Thank you.
Joey, it's awesome to talk to you. Please keep us updated on what you're working on. Whenever you got something coming out, happy to look at it and chat with you about it and help get it out in front of viewers, because there's a lot of interest. And yeah, we want to like I said, Carmen Imes jumped on the live stream this past weekend, and I was saying, Carmen, you're one of the people. Disciple Dojo exists to help Christians find and sift through all the stuff out there and find the good stuff. And I told Carmen, she's one of the people that's making the good stuff. And I believe the same about you. You're one of the people that's making the good stuff that I want people to have access to for Dojo viewers. So yeah, carte blanche, man. This is your blue belt appearance. So next time you come on the show, you'll be a purple belt. And then 2 more times and you get your black belt at Disciple Dojo. So well, Joey, thanks so much for spending the day with us, man. Have a great holiday season. Again, I want to thank Joey for coming on and talking with us. Also want to thank Hendrickson, the publisher, for sending me a digital copy of the book to read through. So as I said in the episode, I'm going to put the link in the video description below where you can pre-order Joey's book. If any of this conversation interested you, you will love his book. Definitely check it out. Once again, if you haven't already, we would love for you to subscribe to this channel. And if you want to more tangibly support us, Disciple Dojo is a nonprofit teaching ministry. We rely not on YouTube revenue. We rely on our monthly dojo donors. We don't do Patreon. We don't put things behind paywalls. We don't have tiered memberships. We just said from day one, when we became a nonprofit, we're going to make all of our teaching material available free as much as we can, as widely as we can, online, and trust that God will bring donors, supporters who believe in what we're doing enough to give, particularly on a monthly basis. So if you would like to do that in any way, a few dollars a month or significantly more, if you've been blessed with that, we would love for you to consider becoming a monthly dojo donor. Here's the information right here on the screen where you can do that. And as always, if you become a donor on a monthly basis, we have these iron-on patches, either our light color or our dark color. These are for our monthly donors. Whatever amount, doesn't matter what you give. I don't see what you give. We just ask, if you are a monthly donor, send me an email. You have to request these. We don't send them automatically. Send me an email on the website and just say, I'm a dojo donor and I'd love either a light patch or a dark patch. I will get one of these to you as my way of saying thank you for keeping this ministry going, for literally keeping the lights on, for enabling us to do all that we do through this ministry. All right. That'll do it for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here next time at Disciple Dojo. In the meantime, as always, keep training.